The urban is not so much a physical space, but rather a condition created by a network of elements, discrete bodies. What is urbanity? Urban is the scaleless meta-apparatus spanning from the body to the planetary. What is the status quo? What are the socioeconomic conditions that exist under the urban? What are the origins of how we understand the concept of urban life? The urban is, at its best, a fruit of diversity, inclusion, opportunity, and chaotic discipline. At its worst, the urban is a machine of control, dominance, and surveillance puppeteered by those with power. Urban life is dynamic, not static. The history of urbanization reveals how cities grow, but also how they can decline and die from the symptoms of political, economic, demographic, environmental, and other contextual changes. Urban is a continuously shifting and evolving outcome. The transport hub, a place where distinctive paths intersect, exists as the epitome of urban life. The hub begins as a transitory space frequented only as a consequence of an attempt to reach elsewhere. However, despite the individual's fleeting need to get from one place to the next, the construction of architecture lends the facility a physical presence. The transport hub then becomes a node for aggregation of urban activity and as a supplier for urban needs, such as food, news, essential goods, and human interaction. How does urbanity change? Trauma, safety, health, gender roles, race, local identities, technology. Psychological patterns and responses are crucial in understanding the dynamics of an urban space. At our core, humans are driven by emotional logic and illogic. Collective trauma are the psychological reactions to a traumatic event that affect and are shared by a group of people. Pandemic, an outbreak of a disease that prevails over a whole country or the world. CDC wants people to drive solo to avoid coronavirus, sparking fear over more congestion and emissions. Much of the fear of shared vehicles will remain. Fear shapes actions, but ultimately also future building codes and systematic planning strategies in the city.
Which are below 38 degrees Celsius. Thermal scanners like these are fast becoming part of everyday life. They're already deployed at all air, land, and sea checkpoints.
Our healing is essential, our healing is political, our healing is protest. How are these urban conditions reflective of a culture defined by gender and racial disparity? Our technology is biased, and bias extends into our digital spaces too. Efficiencies and inefficiencies in transit pathways privilege some activities over others and inevitably privilege select groups of people. How can we make daily life more equitable across different race and gender groups?
There's deep work that is required for healing. And I don't want us to strip the humanity from that or center problematic structures into it. But I do believe that we can create space, platforms, expressions, and experiences that foster healing for ourselves and amongst others.
Networks. Urban as an apparatus or a machine. When thought of as an apparatus, we begin to think of urban as its own separate entity, not just a collection of separate parts, but something new entirely. Key to the emergence of the urban was the transposition of ideas regarding circulation and power. The frame that used to act as a point of entry now acts as a point of surveillance. These tools of surveillance have extended beyond a point of entry, becoming a tool for understanding and potentially punishing patterns of behavior. However, these tools of surveillance can also be democratized and serve as protection for the public against undesirables, such as illicit activities or spread of infectious diseases. How can the dispersion of presence among individuals create a more democratic means of getting around? Urban networks have been dictated by shifts from points of presence to fields of presence. Political events and protests are organized on digital and physical platforms. Physical gatherings generate digital images and create a continuous dialogue between the physical and the digital. How do these digital fields of presence and networks begin to overlap with the discrete individual? What do these points of presence tell us about the way urbanism is designed and created? Is there a way to address these sort of digital connections and organize through a physical point of presence such as a transit hub? What is the future of urban networks? Cities are developing nervous systems. Like any other population composed of a large number of discrete elements, the city displays a bottom-up collective intelligence that is more than the behavior of its parts. The city operates through a form of swarm intelligence. Humans are discrete bodies whose collective behaviors are larger than their individual parts. How must we understand urbanism to create a new paradigm for urban life and our transit systems? The city is a manifestation of emergence. We must aim to reproduce an apparatus to develop an adaptable system for urban growth unconfined by the bounds of a single scale. Changing economies, environment, and migration shape the nature of urbanity. What would a new urban equity agenda entail? Equitable housing, equitable health, sustainable urban mobility, and attainable cultural resources. We need to go directly into communities and ask them what their needs are. By designing an apparatus that can react to the changing needs of urban life, we can create a kind of village living at many different scales for a variety of societies, cultures, and climates. An adaptive and responsive system is ecological, economical, and sustainable. By fitting the specific needs of a culture, an adaptable apparatus extends equity within the social context it intervenes. Face-to-face interaction is irreplaceable, and this sole fact will help cities recover. Essential community needs must be accessible. We must define alternate models that a transport hub will assume in the future. Transport nodes must disperse. By privileging access to essential goods, we can begin to understand the transport hub as a space to distribute healthcare services, access to food and grocery, educational and workspace facility, and screening checkpoints. By connecting central points of each neighborhood through a network of rails, an apparatus is created by which robotic machines can quickly assemble or disassemble discrete elements into essential spaces depending on changing community needs. Points of presence becomes fields of presence. With the proliferation of consumer technologies, the urban space, a place of intersection, diversity, and positive social friction, begins to disperse even further between the physical transport hub and the shared digital space. The subway can be characterized as a momentary pause in a dynamic subterranean network of information and transportation composed of bodies, machines, noise, transactions, and routine movements.